the final bit of a nice drop. Hi, welcome to my memoirs. The King and I story, part 2. You might recall that in part 1 I was talking about being back in Australia doing the Mean Pair of Jeans tour when I got a call to audition, or asked me if I'd like to audition for The King and I at the London Palladium, starring the great man himself, the original, the Oscar winner, Yul Brynner. Well, I arrived back in London and the audition was either the next day or the day after. Either way, I was pretty jet lagged, but I was pretty excited about going to audition for what probably would be an amazing production. So I put on something very colourful, which I hope would make me sort of be noticed or stand out. Well, it did a lot more than that. It made everyone dive for their sunglasses when I walked out on stage. Probably not a good strategy. So I got up early the morning of the audition and I went down to the garage to get my car out. And overnight there'd been the earliest snowfall, winter snowfall in London for decades. And there was about 1.5 meters of snowdrift covering the garage door so that I couldn't get the car out or in time. So I had to walk the couple of kilometres to get to Potters Bar British Rail Station in about ankle-deep snow. That put me really behind the 8 ball to get to the theatre on time. And by the time I did get the Palladium, it was really right on audition time. So my adrenaline's pumping, my nerves are pumping. So I was told to go backstage at the Palladium. I walked in the stage door and down this corridor and I looked in the dressing room. There were a couple of very fair Anglo-Saxon looking actors putting on makeup and eye makeup with a spatula, trying to make themselves look remotely Asian. Wasn't a problem for me because they wanted a very authentic Asian look to this King and I production. Probably one of the first to go down that road. So I walked out on stage and I did my song after they'd all grabbed their sunglasses to shield them from the top I was wearing. And after I'd done the song, the producer, Ross Taylor, came up on stage and said, that was very nice, Marty, but we're going to have to build up your pectorals. I said, my what? He said, your pectorals. He meant chest muscles. He said, because this production, you're bare-chested through the whole show. So, you know, you've just got to look good, you know. So anyway, I'm thinking to myself, hey, I'll do anything. I'll stand on my head if I have to. So I auditioned that day. I waited 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Phone call came. You've been called back again. Fantastic. Went back, auditioned. Same thing happened again. About 3 or 4 days, get called back. And of course, as actors, the more we get called back, the more engaged and deeper we get into the process that we really want this role, because we're really starting to get into it, and the more times you get called back, the greater the desire to actually do the show. So we got to the end of the 5th audition, and I was told by the producer that the next audition, the 6th, would be in front of the great man himself. So I rocked into the theatre yet again and walked out on stage and couldn't see him anywhere. No, I knew what he looked like, just had to look for a guy that didn't have any hair. Anyway, I did my song and I finished, and all of a sudden there was a booming voice resonated out of the back stalls. Can you sing it in a higher key? And I said, I'll sing it in whatever key you want, which I did, and must have done the trick, because the next day I got a phone call from the agent to say, Marty, congratulations, you've got the role of Luntar in The King and I. I was thrilled. I was exhilarated. It was just wonderful, because I'd gone to England to try and further my career, and what a break after only being in England for about, I'd say 4 months. So anyway, I was floating on air. Didn't last long. The next day I got a call from my agent. I've got some bad news, Marty. My heart sank. She said, British Equity will not allow you to play the role in The King and I. They want the role to go to a British actor. These were the bad old days when Australians had to really struggle in America and in England to get a foothold, while Americans and English were just performing all over Australia, as you would well know. So I was totally deflated. I felt terrible. I was really down in the dumps. But as fate would have it, the next day I get a phone call. "Hi Marty, it's Bobby Lim. I've just arrived at Heathrow. I'd love to catch up." Now Bobby Lim at the time was the president of Australian Equity, the actors union in Australia. And so I invited him around to dinner that night to join us for dinner. And my wife Rosa cooked up a lovely meal. And I told the story to Bobby. And as I was telling him the story, I could see the anger building up in Bobby. And at the end of the evening, he said, "Don't you worry, Marty." He said, "We'll fix this. We'll make sure you get this role in The King and I." He said, "Because it's not just important for you as an Australian, but it's important for Australian actors to have these opportunities." Because he well knew what was going on back in Australia. And so he said to me, "I'll give you a call tomorrow." He said, "We're going down to see the Agent General, Peter Falkenberg, in Australia House. The Agent General for New South Wales. That's the state's representative for New South Wales in the UK." So the next morning, late morning I think it was, I met Bobby down at Australia House at the Strand. And we went up to Peter Falkenberg's office. Lovely office with wooden panelling and old leather chairs, and just very, very, very nice and very comfortable looking. And we went in and sat down, and Bobby recounted the story of what had happened to Peter Falkenberg. And then Peter Falkenberg asked me some questions, and he listened very attentively. And then he said, "Just hang on, I'm just going to make a phone call." So Peter Falkenberg picks up the phone and he dials. And someone obviously picked up the phone at the other end. And he said, "Hi Nev, it's Peter. Peter in London. Have I caught you at a bad time?" Obviously not, because he kept speaking. And he repeated the whole story to Nev, whoever Nev was. And I looked across at Bobby, and Bobby looked over at me, and he mouthed silently. And it suddenly dawned on me that Peter Falkenberg was talking to the Premier of New South Wales at the time, Neville Wran. And Peter told us afterwards that Neville Wran had said to him that if Marty Rhone does not get that role in The King and I, there will be no English entertainers performing in the state the very next week. He would stop them from working there, because as we know, the club industry was still big back in the 70s, and there were Englishmen like Des O'Connor, Max Bygraves, comedians, bands, you name it, they were working, and mostly in New South Wales. So it is really humbling to think that I owe my appearance in The King and I to three men. Bobby Lim, who of course was pretty famous. Well, Bobby was famous himself. He'd had The Sound of Music that he did with Dawn, and he didn't have to do that for me, but he did. And of course Peter Falkenberg and Neville Wran, the late Premier of New South Wales, had all worked together to enable me to get the role of a lifetime, the role of Luntar in The King and I. That was the upside. The downside was to come a year and a half later, which I'll tell you about in the next part. I'll also tell you in part 3 about the wonderful experiences I had doing The King and I. It's one of the highlights of a career that has had a lot of highlights, but something that has always stayed with me and been very memorable. Part 3 will be two-edged, the highlight and the low light. So I hope you'll tune in for part 3. See you next time.